For those who surface again, the war never ends, Teo. It only lives on in memory and in silence.
May 1943, North Atlantic. 43 German U-boats sank in 30 days.
Quiet.
Not by superior firepower, not by more ships, not by braver men, but by invisible radio waves 10 centimeters long that a German commander would never see, never understand, and never survive.
Desperate for air.
This is the story of how a technology smaller than your fist changed the outcome of World War II, and why the man they called the Ghost of the Atlantic died without knowing what killed him. Captain Eric Topp stood in the conning tower of U-552, scanning an empty horizon.
Swift.
3 years of war had taught him to trust his instincts. Right now, every instinct screamed danger. The sea was too calm. The sky too quiet. Something was wrong.
What sinks beneath its surface.
Topp was no ordinary commander. 35 Allied ships sunk. Nearly 200,000 tons sent to the bottom. Holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. His crew called him the Ghost because he struck without warning and vanished before escorts arrived. But on this morning in May 1943, the Ghost was about to discover that someone could see him. Someone was watching. Someone had been watching all along. The convoy appeared at dawn. 40 merchant ships stretched across the horizon like a floating city. Topp's pulse quickened. This was the kind of target that made careers, the kind that won wars. He raised his hand to give the attack order. Then he heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist, a high-pitched electronic pulse coming from above, a sound that made his blood run cold. Because in 1943, submarines didn't get detected before they attacked. They were the hunters, not the prey. Until now. 6 months earlier, Germany was winning the Battle of the Atlantic. Winning. U-boats operated in coordinated wolf packs, guided by intelligence so good they could read British naval codes almost in real time. Admiral Karl Dönitz commanded over 400 operational U-boats, enough to strangle Britain's supply lines completely. The numbers told a brutal story. November 1942 alone saw 119 Allied ships sunk, totaling 729,000 tons. British merchant fleet losses exceeded new construction by 300,000 tons every single month. At this rate, Britain would run out of food and fuel by summer 1943. Winston Churchill later wrote something that revealed just how desperate things were. The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. I was even more anxious about this battle than I had been about the glorious air fight called the Battle of Britain. Think about that. The man who stood against Hitler when all of Europe fell said submarines were his greatest fear. Not the Luftwaffe, not tanks, not invasion. Submarines. But by May 1943, something fundamental had changed. Allied shipping losses dropped 75% in just 3 months. U-boat losses tripled. Experienced commanders like top men who had survived dozens of patrols were reporting encounters they couldn't explain. Ships that detected them in total darkness. Aircraft that found them in fog so thick you couldn't see 10 meters. Destroyers that tracked them underwater with impossible supernatural accuracy. The German Naval High Command was baffled. Their intelligence suggested no major breakthrough in Allied technology. Their cryptographers confirmed British codes remained secure. Yet somehow Allied forces were hunting U-boats with precision that defied every law of naval warfare they understood. It was as if the Allies could see through steel, through water, through the very ocean itself. Topp had heard the rumors in the officers' mess at Lorient. Wild theories about secret weapons, about traitors in the Kriegsmarine, about supernatural detection methods involving psychics and magic. He dismissed them as paranoid fantasies of exhausted men pushed beyond their limits, until that morning in May when he heard the pulse, until the moment he realized that something was hunting him and he had no idea what it was. Topp grabbed the voice pipe. "Alarm! Clear the bridge!" The crew reacted with the instant precision of men who knew hesitation meant death. Klaxons blared throughout the boat. Men scrambled down the ladder feet, clanging on wet metal. The diesel engines cut off as electric motors engaged with a whine. U-552's bow tilted downward, diving toward the safety of deep water. But even as they dove, Topp knew something was catastrophically wrong. The electronic pulse had come from directly overhead. But there was no aircraft visible. The sky was empty except for scattered clouds at 3,000 feet. Nothing. Just open sky and that impossible sound. "Level at 60 meters, he ordered, his voice steady, despite the ice in his stomach. Silent running. In the control room, First Watch Officer Klaus Bergman looked at him with questioning eyes that held the beginning of fear. "Captain, what did you see?" Topp met his gaze. "Nothing. But I heard something. An electronic signal, very high frequency." Bergman frowned. "Astic. But we're still on the surface. That's impossible." Topp shook his head slowly. "Not Astic. Something else. Something new." They waited in silence. The only sounds were the hum of electric motors and the creak of the pressure hull adjusting to depth. Topp checked his watch. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. Every submariner knew that silence meant safety. If you couldn't hear them, they couldn't hear you. That was the rule that had governed submarine warfare since 1914. That was the rule that had kept them alive for 3 years. Then they heard it. The unmistakable drone of aircraft engines growing louder. The hydrophone operator's voice cracked slightly as he called out, "Twin engines heavy. Probably a Liberator." Topp felt something cold settle in his stomach. They had been 12 kilometers from the convoy when they dove. The Liberator should have been searching near the merchant ships patrolling the obvious approach routes. Yet somehow it had come straight to their position, straight to them, as if it knew exactly where they were. The depth charges began falling. 6 explosions, each one closer than the last, walking toward them with methodical precision. The hull groaned like a living thing in pain. Light bulbs shattered raining glass. Men grabbed handholds as the boat pitched violently, throwing loose equipment across the compartments. But U-552 was deep enough. The charges exploded above them, deadly, but not fatal. After 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours, the Liberator moved away. Topp waited another full hour before surfacing, following procedures written in the blood of less careful commanders. When they finally broke through, the convoy was gone, vanished over the horizon. A full day's pursuit wasted, an attack opportunity lost, and a mystery that made Topp's hands shake slightly as he wrote in his patrol log, "Detected by unknown means while still on surface. Aircraft appeared within minutes despite no visual contact. Recommend immediate investigation of possible new Allied detection technology." He didn't know it yet, but he had just encountered centimetric radar, a technology so secret that even most Allied commanders didn't fully understand how it worked. A technology that would kill him and thousands of other submariners in the coming months. A technology that would change naval warfare forever. 3 days later, Topp found another convoy. This time he was more careful, more paranoid. He stayed submerged during daylight, tracking the merchant ships by periscope alone, never exposing more than a few inches of metal above the water. He would attack at night. Night was when U-boats held every advantage. Submarines in 1943 were actually surface vessels that could dive temporarily for safety. They were faster on the surface, had better visibility, could use their deck guns to conserve precious torpedoes. Night attacks were the U-boat's natural hunting ground, the environment where they dominated. Darkness made them invisible to aircraft. Darkness made them nearly impossible for escorts to spot with the naked eye. At 2300 hours, U-552 surfaced 8 kilometers from the convoy. The night was absolutely perfect for attack. Overcast sky, no moon. Visibility less than 500 meters. Topp could see the dark shapes of merchant ships silhouetted against the stars, but they couldn't possibly see him. It was physically impossible. "Battle stations," he ordered quietly, Prepare tubes 1 through 4. The torpedo crew worked with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, all 4 bow tubes were loaded and ready. Topp calculated the firing solution personally the way he always did. Speed, distance, angle, torpedo running time. After 3 years of war and dozens of attacks, he could do it almost by instinct, a deadly mathematics written in the bodies of drowned merchant seamen. He raised his hand to give the firing order, his finger about to send 4 torpedoes into the heart of the convoy. Then the sea around them exploded in light. A star shell burst directly overhead, turning night into day in an instant. U-552 was suddenly exposed, caught in brilliant white light, like an insect under a microscope. Topp spun around, his night vision destroyed, seeing spots. A British destroyer was charging straight at them, bow wave white in the artificial daylight. It had appeared from nowhere. No warning, no radar contact, no visual sighting, just suddenly there, as if it had materialized out of thin air. "Alarm, dive, dive, dive!" Topp screamed, but he knew even as the words left his mouth that it was too late. The destroyer was too close, moving too fast, closing the distance at 30 knots. As U-552's bow dipped below the surface, Topp saw the depth charge racks on the destroyer's stern tilt backward, ready to deliver death. The first pattern of charges exploded just as they passed 30 meters, still far too shallow for safety. The boat bucked like a wild horse, throwing men against bulkheads. Cork insulation designed to muffle sound rained from the overhead like snow. The main electrical panel sparked and went dark, plunging half the boat into emergency lighting. "Damage report!" Topp shouted over the chaos, over the sound of men screaming and metal groaning. "Stern diving planes jammed," someone called out. "Hydraulic leak in the control room," another voice added. "Port electric motor overheating. More depth charges. Closer this time, much closer." The pressure hull groaned with a sound that every submariner dreaded, the sound of steel flexing beyond its design limits, the sound that said the boat was about to break apart. "Take her to 180 meters, Topp ordered. It was deeper than recommended, deeper than safe, but they had no choice. Better to risk implosion from pressure than certain death from depth charges. For 3 hours the destroyer hunted them. It stayed directly overhead with uncanny, impossible accuracy, dropping depth charges in a methodical pattern that showed complete confidence in its tracking. Every time Topp tried to slip away, changing course and speed, the destroyer adjusted instantly to follow. It was as if the British captain could see through the water, could watch U-552 moving like a fish in a glass bowl. Finally, at 0300 hours, the attack stopped. The destroyer moved away. Topp waited another 2 full hours before surfacing, every minute an agony of tension. When they finally broke through gasping diesel engines, sucking in fresh air, the convoy was long gone, escaped, safe, protected by whatever invisible force was guiding those destroyers. By the 3rd week of May, Topp had sunk only 2 ships. 2. A pathetic, humiliating result for a commander of his experience and reputation. Worse, he'd been forced to dive 14 times to avoid aircraft that appeared out of nowhere. His fuel was running critically low. His crew was exhausted, jumping at every sound, their nerves stretched to breaking. But the real problem wasn't the lack of sinkings or the wasted fuel or the exhausted crew. The real problem was the pattern he was seeing, a pattern that made absolutely no sense according to everything he knew about submarine warfare. That evening, Topp spread his charts across the wardroom table. Bergman and Chief Engineer Herman joined him, their faces drawn with fatigue. "Look at this," Topp said, marking positions with a red pencil, each mark representing a detection, each mark a moment when something had found them. "Every time we've been detected in the last 3 weeks. 14 incidents. What do you see?" Bergman studied the marks carefully, his engineering mind looking for patterns. "They're all different situations. Day attacks, night attacks, fog, clear weather, surface detections, periscope depth detections, deep diving detections, near convoys, far from convoys. There's no common factor." Topp nodded slowly. "Exactly. There's no pattern to when we're detected. No pattern to where. No pattern to how. Which means... He let the implication hang in the air. Herman finished the thought quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Which means they can always detect us, anytime, anywhere, under any conditions. The three men looked at each other, and in that moment they understood what it meant. Every advantage U-boats had held for 3 years was gone. The invisibility, the surprise, the ability to strike and vanish, all of it, gone. Topp pulled out another chart, this one showing U-boat losses across the entire Atlantic theater. The numbers were devastating, apocalyptic. In the first 20 days of May alone, 31 U-boats had been sunk. 31 boats. 31 crews. Over 1,500 men dead or captured. That was more than the entire month of April. More than any single month in the entire war. The graph showed losses accelerating, climbing toward some terrible crescendo. The Americans are building Liberty ships faster than we can sink them. Topp set his voice flat with the weight of realization. In April they launched 140 new merchant ships. We sank 56. That's a net gain of 84 ships for the Allies. Every single month they get stronger. Every single month we get weaker. He drew a simple graph on the chart, 2 lines crossing in the future like a prophecy. 1 line going up, 1 line going down. They intersected in July. If this continues by summer, we won't be able to sink enough ships to matter. The convoy system will be unbreakable. He didn't need to finish the thought. They all understood the implications. Germany's entire war strategy depended on starving Britain into surrender, on cutting the Atlantic lifeline that kept the island alive. If the U-boats failed, if the convoys got through, Germany would lose the war. It was that simple, that brutal. Bergman voiced the question they were all thinking, the question that had been haunting every U-boat commander in the Atlantic. What changed? 6 months ago, we were winning. We were on the verge of victory. Now we can barely survive a single patrol. What did the Allies develop? Topp shook his head slowly, feeling every one of his 38 years. I don't know. But whatever it is, it's not just one thing. They're detecting us on the surface. That's probably radar, but more advanced than anything we've encountered. They're finding us at night when radar shouldn't work. That shouldn't be possible according to our technical manuals. And they're tracking us underwater with accuracy that exceeds ASTIC by an order of magnitude. Herman pulled out a technical manual, flipping to a well-worn page. Our METOX receivers can detect British radar at 30 kilometers. They've saved hundreds of boats. But we're being found by aircraft that our METOX never picks up. Never gives any warning at all. Either they've developed radar that operates on a completely different frequency, something our receivers can't detect. He paused, not wanting to say it. Topp finished for him. Or METOX doesn't work anymore, which means every U-boat in the Atlantic is blind, deaf, sailing straight into ambushes without any warning system at all. The implications were terrifying beyond words. Hundreds of U-boats were operating right now under the fundamental assumption that METOX would warn them of approaching aircraft in time to dive. That assumption had been proven true hundreds of times. It was doctrine. It was survival procedure. If that assumption was wrong, if METOX had been rendered obsolete by some new technology, then they were all sailing into death traps. Every single boat. Every single crew. Topp made a decision that violated every protocol, a decision that could get him court-martialed. I'm breaking radio silence. Naval Command needs to know what we're seeing out here. They need to know now. It was dangerous, potentially suicidal. British direction-finding stations could triangulate radio transmissions within minutes, vector destroyers and aircraft onto the source. But the risk was worth it. Other commanders needed to know. Donitz needed to know. Someone needed to understand that the rules of submarine warfare had changed. He drafted the message carefully, choosing each word for maximum clarity. Detected repeatedly by unknown means. Stop. Aircraft, locate U-552 in zero visibility. Stop. Surface radar. Detection without METOX warning. Stop. Night attacks by destroyers with impossible accuracy. Stop. Request immediate technical analysis. Stop. Top. The radio operator encoded the message using the Enigma machine they believed was unbreakable, compressed it into a 3-second burst transmission. Then they dove immediately and changed course standard procedure after any transmission, praying the British hadn't gotten a fix on them. The reply came 6 hours later, decoded with hands that shook slightly. Your report acknowledged. Stop similar reports from multiple boats. Stop. Technical investigation underway. Stop. Continue patrol. Stop. Donuts. Topp read the message twice, each word hammering another nail into his certainty. Similar reports from multiple boats. So it wasn't just U-542. It wasn't just him going crazy or making mistakes. It wasn't equipment failure or bad luck. The entire U-boat force was encountering the same phenomenon, facing the same invisible enemy. Something had fundamentally changed in the Battle of the Atlantic, and the German Navy had no idea what it was. They were fighting blind against an enemy who could see everything. But what Topp didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that by the time his message reached Donitz, it was already too late. The technology that was hunting him had been deployed across the entire Atlantic. Every escort ship, every patrol aircraft, every convoy route. The invisible net was complete, and the U-boats were swimming straight into it blind and doomed and unaware that they'd already lost the war. Topp's message reached Berlin on May 22, 1943. 31 U-boats dead in 20 days. Hundreds of men drowned or captured, and the German Naval High Command had no idea why. They knew something was wrong. They didn't know it was already too late. Because while Topp was fighting for survival in the Atlantic 3,000 miles away in Britain, a technology was being deployed that would end submarine warfare as Germany knew it. A technology born not from some brilliant admiral or famous scientist, but from a team of exhausted engineers working in a converted university laboratory. And the man who would make it work wasn't a hero. He was a stubborn, difficult, impossibly arrogant physicist that almost everyone in the British military wanted to punch in the face. But what they didn't know was that this insufferable genius was about to save their entire nation. Professor Philip Dee stood in the telecommunications research establishment at Malvern, staring at a device the size of a shoebox. The cavity magnetron. 6 months of testing. 12 prototype versions. Hundreds of failures. And now finally it worked. It produced radio waves 10 centimeters long instead of the standard 1.5 meters. Radar that could see a submarine's periscope from 5 kilometers away. Radar that could detect a surfaced U-boat in total darkness at 30 kilometers. Radar that German Metox receivers couldn't detect because they weren't designed to pick up these frequencies. Radar that would change everything. But Dee had a problem. A massive, catastrophic problem that threatened to kill his invention before it ever reached the Atlantic. The Royal Navy didn't want it. March 1943. Dee walked into a conference room at the Admiralty in London, carrying his prototype radar unit like it was made of gold. Around the table sat 15 officers representing every branch of naval aviation and surface warfare. Men with decades of experience. Men who had fought in the First World War. Men who knew how warfare worked. Admiral Sir Percy Noble sat at the head, his face already set in the expression Dee recognized from a dozen previous meetings. Skeptical, dismissive. Done with this conversation before it started. Gentlemen, Dee began setting the magnetron on the table. This device can detect U-boats in conditions previously impossible. Fog, darkness, heavy weather. We've tested it extensively. The results are extraordinary. Noble didn't even look at the device. Professor Dee, we've been through this. Our current metric radar operates perfectly well. ASV Mark II has been in service for 2 years. The crews are trained on it. Why would we waste resources replacing a system that works? Dee felt his jaw tighten. They'd had this exact conversation 3 times already. Because ASV Mark II operates on 1.5-meter wavelengths. U-boats can detect it with METOX receivers and dive before our aircraft arrive. They're not blind anymore, Admiral. They can hear us coming from 30 kilometers away. This new radar operates on 10 centimeters. METOX can't detect it. They won't know we're there until we're dropping depth charges on their heads. Commander James Walker, representing Coastal Command, leaned forward. And how many aircraft do we have equipped with this miracle device? How many trained operators? How many replacement units if they break down in the field? Dee's silence was answer enough. Walker continued, his voice heavy with the patience of a teacher explaining simple concepts to a slow child. Professor, we have hundreds of aircraft operating in the Atlantic right now. Thousands of trained crews. Established maintenance procedures. Supply chains. You're asking us to throw all of that away for an unproven technology. Do you understand what that would mean? I understand that you're losing, Dee said quietly, and the room went deadly silent. I understand that U-boat sinkings have increased 300% in the last year. I understand that merchant ship losses exceeded new construction every single month of 1942. I understand that at current rates, Britain will run out of food by August. So yes, Commander, I do understand what it would mean to deploy new technology. It would mean winning instead of slowly starving to death. Noble's face went red. Professor Dee, you will watch your tone. This is not a university debate club. This is the Royal Navy. We make decisions based on operational reality, not theoretical physics. Your device may work in a laboratory. That doesn't mean it will work in combat conditions. Aircraft vibration, salt spray, battle damage, temperature extremes. Have you tested for any of these factors? Dee hadn't. They both knew it. Noble stood up, signaling the meeting was over. When you have a device that's been operationally tested, proven reliable in field conditions, and can be manufactured in quantities sufficient to make a difference, then we'll talk. Until then, stop wasting our time. But there was one man in that room who didn't dismiss Dee. One man who had actually looked at the numbers and understood what they meant. Air Vice Marshal Sir Philip de la Ferté, newly appointed to head an inter-service committee on anti-submarine warfare. He'd spent the last month reading every patrol report from the Atlantic. He'd seen the pattern. More U-boats, more attacks, more losses. The current system wasn't working. Something had to change, or they would lose the war. After the meeting ended and the others filed out, Joubert approached Dee. Walk with me, Professor. They left the Admiralty building, walking through London streets still scarred from the Blitz. Joubert lit a cigarette before speaking. They're not wrong, you know. The Navy operates on proven systems. They have to. Men's lives depend on equipment that works every single time. Dee started to protest, but Joubert raised a hand. However, they're also losing, which means proven systems aren't enough anymore. You need to prove your radar works, not in a laboratory, in actual combat conditions. Can you do that? Dee thought for a moment, calculating. Give me 2 aircraft. 2 crews willing to trust experimental equipment. 3 weeks of testing over the Atlantic. If it works, if we can prove detection rates better than current radar, will that be enough? Joubert smiled grimly. If you can prove it works, I'll ram it down the Navy's throat personally. But understand something, Professor. You get one chance. One demonstration. If it fails, if there's any malfunction or ambiguous result, Noble will kill this program permanently. The Navy doesn't give second chances to civilian academics who insult admirals. Dee got his 2 aircraft. 2 Coastal Command Liberators pulled from routine patrols. 2 crews told they were testing experimental equipment, not told what it did or why it mattered. He had 3 weeks to prove that 10-centimeter radar could revolutionize anti-submarine warfare. 3 weeks to overcome decades of naval tradition and bureaucratic inertia. 3 weeks to save Britain from starvation. No pressure at all. The installation took 4 days. Dee's team worked around the clock, fitting the magnetron into the Liberator's nose running cables, calibrating the display screen, testing and retesting every connection. The crews watched with the special skepticism of men who had flown hundreds of combat hours and seen every miracle weapon fail in actual use. On April 12, 1943, the first test flight launched from RAF St. Evil in Cornwall. Dee sat in the navigator's position, hands sweating as he powered up the radar. The screen flickered to life, showing a circular display with range rings marked in kilometers. Nothing. Just empty ocean below and the green glow of the cathode ray tube. They flew for 2 hours. Nothing. Dee felt his stomach tighten. Maybe Noble was right. Maybe it didn't work in combat conditions. Maybe he was just another academic with a clever theory and no practical application. Then at the edge of the screen, a tiny blip appeared. 28 kilometers away. The pilot squadron leader John Fenwick looked over his shoulder. "What is it?" Dee's hands were shaking as he checked the readings. "A contact. Surface vessel. Bearing 340 degrees. Range 28 kilometers." Fenwick exchanged glances with his co-pilot. 28 kilometers was impossible. Their current radar could maybe detect a surfaced U-boat at 15 kilometers in perfect conditions. "You're certain?" Dee nodded, not trusting his voice. Fenwick turned the Liberator toward the contact. As they closed the distance, the blip grew stronger, clearer. At 15 kilometers, the lookouts spotted it visually. A fishing trawler exactly where the radar said it would be. "Holy Mother of God," Fenwick whispered. "It actually works." Over the next 3 weeks, they flew 18 missions. They detected 43 surface vessels at ranges that would have been impossible with old radar. They found 2 U-boats in fog so thick you couldn't see the Liberator's wingtips from the cockpit. They tracked targets in darkness, in rain, in conditions where visual detection was utterly hopeless. The numbers were undeniable. Average detection range with ASV Mark II, 14 kilometers. Average detection range with centimetric radar, 29 kilometers. More than double. And that was just the average. In good conditions, the new radar could see U-boats at 35 kilometers. From that range, aircraft could begin their attack run before the U-boats' lookouts even knew they were there. Before METOX could warn them. Before they had any chance to dive. Dee compiled the results into a report 50 pages long, filled with graphs and statistics and detailed technical analysis. Then he added one paragraph at the end, written in plain English that even admirals could understand. If every coastal command aircraft were equipped with centimetric radar, tomorrow U-boat losses would triple within 1 month. If every escort ship received it within 3 months, the Battle of the Atlantic would be won by summer. This is not speculation. This is mathematical certainty based on demonstrated detection capabilities. The technology works. The question is whether we have the courage to use it. Joubert scheduled another meeting at the Admiralty for May 3rd. The same officers, the same conference room, the same skeptical faces. But this time, Dee didn't bring a prototype. He brought numbers. He brought combat results. He brought proof. He spread the reports across the table, each one stamped with Coastal Command authentication. 18 missions, 43 contacts, 0 missed detections, average range 29 kilometers. Here's the data, here's the crew testimony. Here's photographic evidence of every target detected. It works, gentlemen. In combat conditions, in the worst weather the Atlantic can throw at us. It works. Noble picked up one of the reports, reading slowly. Walker examined the graphs. The room was silent, except for papers rustling. Finally, Noble looked up. "Detection is one thing, Professor. Can this be manufactured in quantity? Can it be installed in existing aircraft? Can crews be trained to use it? Can it be maintained in field conditions?" Dee nodded. The Telecommunications Research Establishment has already designed installation kits that can retrofit any Liberator or Sunderland in 48 hours. We can train radar operators in 1 week. The magnetron itself is more reliable than existing radar because it has fewer moving parts, And as for manufacturing, he paused for effect. Western Electric in America can produce 500 units per month starting in June. The British production at GEC can add another 300. That's 800 aircraft equipped per month. Every Coastal Command plane could have this by September. The officers looked at each other. The numbers were too good to ignore. The evidence too solid to dismiss. Commander Walker spoke first. If we do this, if we commit to full deployment, what happens if U-boats develop countermeasures? We'll have spent millions of pounds on equipment they can render obsolete. Dee smiled a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. They can't develop countermeasures against something they don't know exists. And by the time they figure it out, the Battle of the Atlantic will be over. Checkmate, Commander. We've already won. We just need to deploy the pieces. Noble made the decision. Very well. Full deployment authorization. Coastal Command aircraft first priority. Escort ships second. I want production schedules, training programs, and installation procedures on my desk by Friday. And Professor Dee... He fixed the physicist with a hard stare. If this doesn't work as promised, if there are any surprises you haven't told us about, I will personally ensure you never work on a military project again. Are we clear? They were clear. By May 15, 1943, the first production units were rolling off assembly lines. By May 20th, the first operational aircraft took to the skies with centimetric radar installed. By May 24th, they had sunk their first U-boat. U-552. Eric Topp never knew what detected him, never knew why the Liberator found him in darkness, never knew that the invisible pulse he heard was his death sentence. The results exceeded even Dee's predictions. In May 1943, 43 U-boats sank. In June, the number barely dropped, despite Donitz withdrawing most boats from the North Atlantic. Because the radar didn't just detect U-boats near convoys, it detected them everywhere, in the Bay of Biscay, as they transited to patrol areas, in the mid-Atlantic, where they thought they were safe, near their own bases, where they surfaced to recharge batteries. Nowhere was safe anymore. The hunters had become the hunted. But deployment wasn't smooth. Some crews distrusted the new equipment. Some operators couldn't interpret the displays correctly. Some maintenance crews didn't understand the calibration procedures. Dee spent June and July flying from base to base training crews personally, troubleshooting problems, proving again and again that the system worked. At RAF Nuts Corner in Northern Ireland, he encountered a squadron leader who refused to use the centimetric radar, insisting his crews were perfectly capable with visual detection and the old metric radar. "We've been hunting U-boats for 2 years without your fancy equipment, Professor. We don't need it now." Dee looked at him coldly. "How many U-boats has your squadron sunk this year, squadron leader?" The officer's face went red. 3. But that's because... 3. Dee interrupted. Squadron 120 at Reykjavik has had centimetric radar for 3 weeks. They've sunk 7 U-boats. 7. In 3 weeks. Your crews are brave, your tactics are sound, but you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back. Use the radar or get out of the way for people who will. Within 2 weeks, every aircraft in that squadron was equipped and operational. Within a month, they'd sunk 4 more U-boats. The numbers told the story across every base, every squadron, every escort group. Units with centimetric radar were killing U-boats at rates 3 times higher than units without it. And the Germans were noticing. Patrol reports from surviving U-boats spoke of detection rates approaching 100%. Of aircraft appearing within minutes of surfacing, of destroyers tracking them underwater with impossible accuracy. Donitz ordered a full technical investigation, but German scientists concluded that such detection was impossible with current technology. They assumed the Allies had broken their codes, never imagining that simple radio waves could penetrate darkness and fog so completely. By August, U-boat losses stabilized at around 30 per month. High but sustainable for Germany's production rate. The real impact was operational. U-boats couldn't stay on the surface long enough to chase convoys. couldn't recharge batteries safely, couldn't coordinate wolfpack tactics. They were reduced to brief, desperate attacks, followed by long periods submerged and blind. The Battle of the Atlantic wasn't just won by technology. It was won by one difficult, arrogant physicist who refused to accept no from people who thought they knew better, who proved his case with evidence instead of authority, who spent 6 months flying to every base in Britain, proving that his invention worked. But centimetric radar was only half the story. Because while Dee was fighting bureaucracy in Britain, American engineers were perfecting another technology that would make U-boat operations completely impossible. A technology that could track submarines underwater. A technology that Topp's crew would experience in their final moments, wondering how the destroyer above them could follow their every move with such perfect, terrible precision. And that technology wasn't developed by a physicist in a laboratory. It was developed by a former telephone engineer who everyone said was crazy for thinking it would work. That story begins in Boston, at MIT's radiation laboratory, where a man named Luis Alvarez was about to prove that sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that win wars. But that's part 3. For now, understand this. By June 1943, Germany had lost the Battle of the Atlantic. They just didn't know it yet. The technology that killed them was invisible, undetectable, and already deployed across every kilometer of ocean where U-boats operated. And the hunters were closing in. Centimetric radar was deployed. 43 U-boats died in May. The technology worked. But technology alone doesn't win wars. Deployment does, training does, adaptation does. And by June 1943, something terrifying was happening in the Atlantic. The Germans were learning. They were adapting. They were fighting back. And what started as a technological advantage was about to become a desperate race between Allied innovation and German survival instinct. This wasn't a laboratory anymore. This wasn't a test. This was total war, and the enemy was about to make it very, very personal. Kriegsmarine Headquarters, Berlin. June 3, 1943. Admiral Karl Dönitz stood before a wall covered in maps, each one marked with red X's representing dead U-boats. 43 in May. 31 in the first week of June. The numbers were catastrophic, unsustainable. His staff officers stood silent, afraid to speak. They'd never seen the Lion of the Atlantic look so shaken. Dönitz had built the U-boat force from nothing, had perfected wolfpack tactics, had brought Britain to the edge of starvation. Now his boats were dying faster than he could replace them. "Explain it to me again," Dönitz said quietly, his voice dangerous. "How are they finding us?" Kapitän zur See. Eberhard Gott. His chief of operations stepped forward with a folder full of patrol reports. "Every surviving commander reports the same thing, Herr Admiral. Detection without warning. Aircraft appearing in zero visibility. Destroyers tracking us underwater with impossible accuracy. Our Mattox receivers detect nothing. Our lookouts see nothing until it's too late." Dönitz slammed his fist on the table. "That's not an explanation. That's a description of symptoms. I need causes. Is it radar? Is it direction finding? Have they broken our codes?" Gott shook his head. "Our cryptographers insist Enigma remains secure. Our scientists say detection at these ranges is theoretically impossible with known radar technology. British metric radar operates at 1.5 meters wavelength. Our Mattox can detect that at 30 kilometers, yet somehow they're finding us." "Then our scientists are wrong," Dönitz said flatly. "Or the British have developed something our scientists haven't imagined. Either way, gentlemen, we are fighting blind against an enemy who can see perfectly. And unless we find a solution, the U-boat war is over." He turned to face them, his eyes hard. "I want every captured radar unit analyzed. I want interrogations of every Allied aircrew we shoot down. I want our scientists working around the clock. And I want new tactics that assume we will always be detected. No more surface attacks. No more wolf packs. Individual boats submerged operations only. We adapt or we die. The numbers told the story. In the first 3 weeks of June, U-boats managed to sink only 17 merchant ships. 17. Meanwhile, Allied shipyards launched 93 new vessels. The mathematics of starvation had reversed. Britain was gaining ships faster than Germany could sink them. But worse than the numbers was the psychological impact. U-boat crews were terrified. Morale was collapsing. Men who had survived a dozen patrols were refusing to sail again. Some boats returned to port claiming mechanical failures that inspection couldn't find. The hunters had become the hunted, and they knew it. By late June, German scientists finally figured out part of the puzzle. They recovered a damaged British radar unit from a crashed Lee Light Wellington in Tunisia. When they analyzed the magnetron, they realized with horror that it operated on 10-centimeter wavelengths. 10 centimeters. Their Metox receivers were designed for 1.5 meters. They might as well have been listening for elephants while mosquitoes attacked. The detection gap wasn't a small technical improvement. It was a generational leap that rendered every German countermeasure obsolete. They rushed new receivers into production, but it would take months. Months they didn't have. Months during which every U-boat in the Atlantic was blind, vulnerable, and doomed. But while Germany struggled to understand what was killing them, the Allies faced their own crisis. Because centimetric radar wasn't perfect. It was complex. It was finicky. It broke down in salt spray and aircraft vibration. And when it broke, crews died. July 12, 1943. A Coastal Command Liberator, designated M for Mother, took off from RAF Ballykelly in Northern Ireland on routine anti-submarine patrol. The crew was experienced. 8 men who had flown together for 6 months, who trusted each other with their lives. The centimetric radar operator was Flying Officer Thomas Mitchell, 23 years old, former apprentice electrician from Manchester. He'd been trained on the new equipment for exactly 1 week. The patrol was routine for 4 hours. Then the radar screen went blank. Mitchell stared at it, his stomach dropping. "Skipper, I've lost radar. Complete failure." The pilot squadron leader David Hughes kept his voice calm. "Can you fix it?" Mitchell pulled the cover off the magnetron housing checking connections. Everything looked fine. Power was reaching the unit, but the screen stayed dark. "Negative, skipper. It's dead. I don't know why." Hughes made the decision every patrol commander dreaded. "Right. We continue on visual search. Extra lookouts. Everyone stays sharp." They flew for another 3 hours, scanning the ocean by eye the way crews had done for centuries. They saw nothing. At 1647 hours, they were 15 kilometers from a submerged U-boat. The U-boat was U-359, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Heinz Förster. His lookouts saw the Liberator at 12 kilometers, enough warning to dive safely. M for Mother flew directly over U-359's position. Saw nothing. Detected nothing. The submarine escaped. Hughes filed a report that evening about the radar failure. It landed on Philip Dee's desk the next morning along with 17 other similar reports from the previous week. 17 radar failures. 17 missed contacts. Maybe 100 Allied seamen dead because U-boats, those aircraft should have detected, got through to attack convoys. Dee read the reports with growing dread. The magnetron was reliable in laboratory conditions, but combat was different. Temperature extremes, vibration, humidity, salt corrosion, rough handling by tired crews. All of it was killing the delicate vacuum tubes faster than he'd anticipated. The failure rate was nearly 30% after 1 month of operations. 30%. That meant 1 in 3 aircraft was flying blind at any given time. It meant the detection net had holes. It meant U-boats could slip through if they got lucky. The technology worked, but reliability was destroying its effectiveness. Dee spent 3 weeks redesigning the magnetron housing. Better vibration mounting, improved cooling, hermetic sealing against salt spray, better training for crews on preventive maintenance. By August, the failure rate dropped to 12%. Still not perfect, but good enough. Good enough that the detection net was solid again. Good enough that U-boats couldn't rely on Allied equipment failures to save them. Good enough to keep killing submarines. But the real test came on September 20th, 1943. Convoy ONS-18 and ON-202, a combined force of 62 merchant ships crossing from Britain to America, were attacked by the largest concentration of U-boats since May. Donitz, desperate for a victory, had assembled a wolf pack of 19 boats. 19. It was a massive gamble. If it succeeded, it might restore confidence in U-boat operations. If it failed, it would prove that Wolfpack tactics were obsolete. The convoy had 9 escort ships, 3 destroyers, 4 corvettes, 2 frigates. Everyone equipped with centimetric radar and Type 144 ASDIC. Above them, Coastal Command maintained continuous air cover. Liberators and Sunderlands rotating on 4-hour patrols, their radar eyes sweeping the ocean. The U-boats gathered west of Iceland, waiting for the convoy to enter their patrol line. The plan was classic Wolfpack doctrine. Spot the convoy with 1 boat. Transmit its position. Concentrate all boats for a coordinated night attack. Overwhelm the escorts with numbers. U-270 made first contact at dawn on September 20th. Kapitänleutnant Paul Friedrich Otto sent the contact report calling the pack to converge. 18 U-boats turned toward the convoy approaching from multiple directions. It should have worked. It was the tactic that had sunk millions of tons of Allied shipping. It was the tactic that had nearly won the Battle of the Atlantic. It failed completely. Catastrophically. Absolutely. Within 3 hours, escorts detected 12 of the approaching U-boats. Centimetric radar picked them up at ranges beyond anything the German commanders thought possible. They dove immediately, trying to hide underwater. But now they faced the second piece of the Allied detection revolution. Type 144 ASDIC was the British designation for advanced sonar. It operated at higher frequencies than older systems. It could track targets deeper and more accurately. It could maintain contact while attacking using a head-throwing hedgehog mortars instead of depth charges that required passing over the target. The escorts hunted methodically, working in pairs. One ship would hold contact while the other maneuvered for attack. Hedgehog rounds arced through the air, plunging into the sea ahead of the submarine. 24 projectiles per salvo, arranged in a circle pattern. Contact fused. If anyone hit the submarine, it would explode. If they all missed, there was no explosion to confuse the ASDIC. The operators knew immediately whether they'd hit or not. HMS Duncan, a destroyer commanded by Commander Peter Gretton, tracked U-338 for 40 minutes. Every time the U-boat tried to evade ASDIC, found it again. Finally, at 15:23 hours, Duncan fired a hedgehog salvo. The crew counted seconds, waiting. Then a massive underwater explosion. U-338's pressure hull had ruptured. The submarine plummeted toward the bottom 3,000 meters down, taking all 44 crew with it. 1 down. 18 to go. The battle raged for 3 days. U-boats tried every tactic they knew. Submerged attacks, surface attacks at night, coordinated strikes from multiple directions. Nothing worked. The escorts detected them. The aircraft found them. The ASDIC tracked them. Hedgehog killed them. By September 23rd, the Wolfpack had broken off the attack. Final tally: merchant ships sunk 3. U-boats sunk 6. U-270, U-338, U-229, U-305, U-341, U-386. Nearly 300 German submariners dead. More than 2,000 Allied merchant seamen alive, who should have died if the tactics of 1942 still worked. The mathematics of naval warfare had inverted completely. Donitz recalled all U-boats from the North Atlantic on September 24th. He told his staff it was temporary, that they were regrouping and developing new tactics. But everyone knew the truth. The Battle of the Atlantic was lost. U-boats would continue operating for the rest of the war. They would sink ships, kill men, menace convoys, but they would never again threaten Britain's survival. The technological advantage was too great. The detection net too complete. The escorts too skilled. News of the ONS-18 victory spread through Allied forces like wildfire. Newspapers in Britain ran headlines: "Convoy Massacre, Royal Navy Slaughters German Wolf Pack." American propaganda films showed radar operators confidently tracking U-boats' depth charges, exploding jubilant crews, celebrating kills. It was exactly the morale boost the Allies needed after years of watching U-boats rampage across the Atlantic. More importantly, it proved the system worked. Not just in trials, not just in perfect conditions, but in actual combat against Germany's best commanders using their most effective tactics. The statistical impact was staggering. In 1942, U-boats sank 1,160 Allied merchant ships, totaling 6.2 million tons. In 1943, they sank 463 ships, totaling 2.4 million tons. The sinking rate dropped by 60%, despite more U-boats being operational. In the same period, U-boat losses increased from 85 boats in 1942 to 244 boats in 1943. Germany was losing submarines 3 times faster, while sinking ships at 1/3 the rate. The cost-exchange ratio had become unsustainable. For every merchant ship sunk, Germany lost more than half a U-boat and 40 trained submariners it couldn't replace. But numbers don't capture the human dimension. Philip Dee never sailed on a convoy, never fought a U-boat, never fired a weapon in anger. Yet his invention saved tens of thousands of lives. Merchant seamen who would have drowned in burning oil. Escort crews who would have died hunting submarines they couldn't detect. American soldiers whose transport ships made it safely to Europe for D-Day. His radar didn't just sink U-boats, it enabled the entire Allied strategy in Europe. Without control of the Atlantic, there could be no invasion of France, no liberation of Europe, no victory over Nazi Germany. By November 1943, Coastal Command had equipped 487 aircraft with centimetric radar. The Royal Navy had fitted it to 312 escort vessels. Combined with improved Aztec Hedgehog mortars, escort carriers providing air cover and ultra-intelligence from decoded Enigma messages, the anti-submarine system was virtually impenetrable. U-boats still posed a threat. They still required constant vigilance, but they no longer threatened Britain's existence. The crisis had passed. The weapon that Churchill feared most had been neutralized. Eric Topp survived U-552's sinking, spent 2 years in a POW camp, and returned to Germany in 1945. He never learned about centimetric radar, never knew the technology that detected him that morning in May. German naval archives captured after the war revealed that most U-boat commanders died without understanding what hunted them. They blamed bad luck. They blamed Allied numbers. They blamed everything except the truth that they'd been fighting with Stone Age tools against Space Age weapons. The technological gap wasn't incremental, it was existential. In December 1943, Admiral Dönitz wrote in his war diary, "The enemy has rendered the U-boat ineffective through new detection methods we cannot counter. We continue operations to tie down Allied forces, but the decisive weapon the U-boat once was no longer exists." It was an admission of defeat, written in careful military language. The Battle of the Atlantic was over. The Allies had won, and most of the world would never know that victory was delivered by a stubborn physicist, a shoebox-sized magnetron, and radio waves 10 centimeters long. But this story isn't over, because technology doesn't just win wars, it changes them forever. And the radar that saved Britain in 1943 would reshape naval warfare, aviation, meteorology, and eventually create technologies we use every day in the 21st century. The cavity magnetron didn't just sink U-boats, it built the modern world. And that is the final chapter of this story. The one nobody talks about. the legacy that outlasted the war itself. From a stubborn physicist with a shoebox-sized device to 43 U-boats sunk in 1 month. From bureaucratic rejection to complete Allied dominance of the Atlantic. Centimetric radar changed the war, saved tens of thousands of lives, enabled D-Day, defeated Germany's most fearsome weapon. But here's what nobody tells you about winning wars with technology. Success doesn't always reward the people who made it possible. Sometimes victory comes with a price. Sometimes the heroes who changed history disappear into obscurity while others take credit. And sometimes the most important innovations of the 20th century become footnotes that nobody remembers. This is what happened to the men who won the Battle of the Atlantic. And this is why their story matters more than ever. Philip Dee survived the war. He was 41 years old when Germany surrendered in May 1945, exhausted from 6 years of relentless work at the telecommunications research establishment. He'd spent the war years traveling between air bases, training radar operators, troubleshooting equipment failures, fighting bureaucrats who didn't understand what he'd built. He'd missed his daughter's childhood. His marriage was strained to breaking. He'd developed an ulcer from stress and survived 2 near crashes in aircraft testing experimental equipment. When peace finally came, Dee wanted nothing more than to return to academic physics, to teaching to the quiet life he'd left behind in 1939. But the British government had other plans. In June 1945, Dee was summoned to London for what he assumed was a routine debriefing. Instead, he found himself in a classified meeting with representatives from the Ministry of Supply and the newly formed Advisory Council on Scientific Policy. They wanted him to continue defense work, to lead radar development for the post-war military, to help Britain maintain its technological edge against the Soviet Union, which was already emerging as the next great threat. The salary they offered was generous. The laboratories would be state-of-the-art. He would have unlimited funding and influence over Britain's entire radar program. Dee refused. He wanted to go back to Cambridge, back to pure research, back to the world where success meant publishing papers instead of killing submarines. The ministry officials were shocked. Nobody turned down positions like this. They pressed him for weeks, offering more money, more prestige, more power. Dee kept refusing. In September 1945, he returned to Cambridge University as a professor of physics. He never worked on military projects again. Most of his wartime contributions remained classified for decades. While other scientists became famous for their war work building post-war careers on their military reputations, Dee faded into academic obscurity. His students knew him as a brilliant but difficult teacher. His colleagues knew he'd done something important during the war, but not exactly what. The man who saved Britain from starvation taught undergraduate physics and published papers on cosmic rays. Meanwhile, other people took credit for centimetric radar. Senior military officers wrote memoirs claiming they'd championed the technology. Defense contractors used wartime radar development to build commercial empires. Politicians celebrated Britain's scientific triumph without mentioning the difficult physicist who'd fought them for 6 years. Dee didn't complain, didn't write memoirs, didn't give interviews. He'd done what needed to be done, and that was enough. He died in 1983 at age 79, relatively unknown outside academic circles. His obituary in the Times was 4 paragraphs long, mentioned his war work in a single sentence, and misspelled the name of the device he'd perfected. Eric Topp, the U-boat commander who survived U-552's sinking, had a different post-war experience. He spent 2 years in British POW camps, was released in 1947, and struggled to find work in devastated post-war Germany. Former U-boat commanders weren't exactly in demand. He worked odd jobs, struggled with PTSD from 3 years of underwater combat, and tried to forget the 1-500 submariners who had died under his command. In 1958, when West Germany rebuilt its navy as part of NATO, Topp was invited to join. He spent the next 20 years teaching anti-submarine warfare to a new generation of German naval officers. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was training Germans to hunt submarines using the same technologies that had hunted him. He eventually rose to Rear Admiral before retiring in 1969. In interviews late in his life, Topp spoke with grudging respect about Allied technological superiority. "We thought we were the best submarine force in the world," he said in a 1990 documentary. "We had the best boats, the best tactics, the best crews. And none of it mattered because they could see us and we couldn't see them. That's warfare. The side with better technology wins. Simple as that." He died in 2005 at age 91, one of the last surviving U-boat aces. His funeral was attended by veterans from both sides of the Battle of the Atlantic, British escort commanders and German submariners standing together, united by mutual respect for opponents who had tried to kill each other 60 years earlier. But Dee and Topp were individuals. The real legacy of centimetric radar wasn't about people. It was about what the technology became. Because the cavity magnetron didn't stop being important when the war ended. If anything, it became more important. The principles Dee perfected between 1940 and 1945 shaped the entire second half of the 20th century in ways nobody predicted. First, radar itself exploded into civilian applications. Weather forecasting was revolutionized. Before, centimetric radar meteorologists relied on spotty ground observations and pilot reports. After the war, radar networks could track storms across entire continents, see inside cloud formations, predict severe weather hours in advance. The National Weather Service in America built its entire forecasting infrastructure around military surplus radar units. Lives saved by hurricane warnings and tornado alerts over the next 70 years, conservatively estimated at over 50,000. All using technology developed to hunt submarines. Aviation was transformed even more dramatically. Civil air traffic control before the war was primitive, relying on radio reports from pilots and ground observers watching with binoculars. Post-war, every major airport installed radar systems that could track dozens of aircraft simultaneously, preventing collisions, guiding planes through fog, enabling the massive expansion of commercial aviation. By 1955, radar was mandatory at every commercial airport in the developed world. By 1970, satellite-linked radar systems were tracking aircraft across entire oceans. The modern aviation industry, moving 4 billion passengers annually, exists because of cavity magnetron technology developed to kill U-boats. Military applications evolved even faster. The Korean War saw radar-guided fighter interception ground mapping for bombing runs, naval fire control systems that could hit targets beyond visual range. Vietnam brought radar-guided missiles, battlefield surveillance, precision targeting in all weather conditions. Desert Storm in 1991 demonstrated air warfare coordinated entirely through radar and satellite systems, achieving near-total battlefield awareness that would have seemed like science fiction in 1945. Modern stealth technology exists specifically to defeat radar, which tells you how dominant radar became. The entire military-industrial complex of the late 20th century was built on technology that started with a stubborn physicist arguing with admirals in 1943. But the most unexpected legacy was the microwave oven. That's right, the same cavity magnetron that sank U-boats eventually cooked your dinner. In 1945, an engineer named Percy Spencer was testing military radar equipment at Raytheon when he noticed the chocolate bar in his pocket had melted. Intrigued, he put popcorn kernels near the magnetron. They popped. He tried an egg. It exploded. Spencer realized microwave radiation could heat food rapidly and filed a patent for the first microwave oven in 1945. The technology was identical to centimetric radar. By 1970, microwave ovens were appearing in American homes. By 2000, 90% of American households owned one. Millions of people worldwide use cavity magnetron technology every single day without knowing they're using World War II submarine hunting equipment to reheat leftovers. The total impact is staggering. Centimetric radar and its descendants have been used by every military force on Earth since 1945. They've guided billions of aircraft safely to landing. They've warned millions of people about approaching storms. They've tracked satellites, mapped ocean floors, studied atmospheric phenomena, detected incoming missiles, guided spacecraft to other planets. The Voyager probes that left our solar system carried radar systems based on principles Philip Dee perfected. The Mars rovers use ground-penetrating radar derived from wartime technology. Weather satellites monitoring climate change use radar frequencies first tested to hunt U-boats. One invention. 80 years of continuous development. Uncountable applications nobody imagined in 1943. But if this story has a lesson, it's not really about radar. It's about something deeper. Something that matters just as much today as it did in 1943. It's about what happens when institutions reject innovation. When people with power dismiss ideas that threaten established systems. When bureaucrats choose safety over progress because change is risky and failure is embarrassing. Philip Dee had a technology that could end the U-boat threat. He had proof it worked. He had numbers showing it would save thousands of lives. And the Royal Navy told him to go away because adopting new technology was inconvenient. Think about that. Think about how many merchant seamen died between October 1942, when Dee first demonstrated centimetric radar, and March 1943, when deployment finally began. 5 months. Thousands of deaths. Because admirals didn't want to disrupt their training programs and supply chains. That's the real enemy in this story. Not German submarines. Institutional inertia. The bureaucratic impulse to say, not yet, when the correct answer is right now. This pattern repeats throughout history. The machine gun was rejected by European armies for decades because cavalry officers thought charging with sabers was more honorable. Tanks were dismissed as impractical until they proved decisive in World War I. Jet engines were considered too unreliable until Germany deployed them in combat. Nuclear weapons were theoretical until they ended World War II. GPS was a military curiosity until it revolutionized civilian navigation. Every transformative military technology faced resistance from people invested in old systems. And every time the cost of delay was measured in lives. The lesson applies far beyond warfare. Every industry, every organization, every government faces the same choice: embrace disruptive innovation, despite the costs and risks, or cling to comfortable obsolescence until competitors destroy you. The companies that succeeded in the digital revolution were ones willing to cannibalize their own business models. The ones that failed were those that protected legacy systems until they became irrelevant. The same dynamic plays out in medicine, education, energy, transportation. Progress requires people brave enough to push radical ideas against institutional opposition. It requires leaders willing to bet on unproven technology when the alternative is slow decline. It requires the kind of stubborn determination Dee showed fighting the Admiralty for 6 years. And there's one more detail most people don't know. One final twist that brings this whole story full circle. In 1982, 40 years after developing centimetric radar, Philip Dee was finally awarded the Royal Medal by the Royal Society for his contributions to physics. It's one of the highest honors in British science. The ceremony was small, attended mostly by other elderly physicists. Dee was 78 years old, in declining health, barely able to stand for the presentation. The citation mentioned his wartime work for the first time in any official capacity. After the ceremony, a reporter asked him if he felt vindicated if recognition after 4 decades meant anything. Dee thought for a moment before answering. "Recognition isn't why you do the work," he said. "You do the work because it needs doing, because people are dying and you might be able to help. Whether anyone remembers afterward doesn't matter. The merchant seamen who lived to see their families because convoys got through, they're the recognition that matters. Everything else is vanity." He died less than a year later. His estate donated all his papers to Cambridge University, where they sit mostly unread in an archive 3 boxes of notes and calculations that changed the outcome of World War II. Here's what matters about this story. Here's why it deserves remembering. From a stubborn physicist with an unproven device to the technology that won the Battle of the Atlantic, saved Britain from starvation, enabled D-Day, and ultimately shaped the modern world. Philip Dee proved that innovation doesn't come from committees or institutions or prestigious research programs. It comes from individuals willing to fight for ideas everyone else dismisses as crazy. 43 U-boats sunk in May 1943. Tens of thousands of lives saved over the next 2 years. Millions more saved by weather radar aviation safety systems and technologies nobody imagined in 1943. All because one difficult man refused to accept no from people who thought they knew better. The Battle of the Atlantic was won by 10-centimeter radio waves, but more fundamentally it was won by the courage to imagine something that didn't exist, the stubbornness to prove it could work, and the determination to deploy it despite institutional resistance. That's not just a lesson about World War II. That's a lesson about how progress happens. That's a lesson about how one person with a good idea and unshakable conviction can change history. So the next time someone tells you an idea is crazy, remember Philip Dee. Remember that the difference between crazy and visionary is whether it works. Remember that the most important innovations are always the ones nobody believes in until they succeed. And remember that sometimes the people who change the world die in obscurity while others take credit. But they change the world anyway, because that's what matters. Not recognition, not fame, not glory. Just the work itself done well when it needed doing most. That's the invisible technology that won World War II. That's the story nobody tells. And that's why it deserves to be remembered.